Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and the first Monday in the month means it's time for the next issue of Spawn. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in February of 1993, we get a good look here of, once again, one of the really iconic covers from the early days of Spawn. Very reminiscent of McFarlane's work on Spider-Man, and that's actually something that Todd would continue to do for many years, just occasionally throw in some kind of really iconic cover design that he used while in Marvel and adapting that cover for Spawn. And it was a really cool touch. It's a fun little thing for the reader to see and be like, oh yeah, I know where he was coming from with that. Story, Alan Moore. Art, Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Ollie Optics. We see here on the first page an image of Spawn at the top, and underneath is a weird green necroplasmic-filled sphere that has what looks to be a human brain and spinal cord growing out of it. We see Spawn getting closer and the being now taking shape, Spawn getting even closer, and we realize that this is Billy Kincaid, who Spawn killed for being a child murderer and is now finding himself as a soul in the realm of hell, or at least Todd McFarlane's version of hell. It's not really... Todd uses Christianity as a basis for his story, but he doesn't follow everything to the letter in terms of what certain things are or different tenets of the belief. He more or less just uses it as a starting point for basic story ideas and then adapts those into his comic however he feels. And very frequently, a lot of what Todd puts into Spawn, though initially based on a Judeo-Christianic belief system, is really not something that's part of those beliefs. It's just Todd's own little story that he's making up using those things as a reference. Here on the next page, we see Billy has fully formed inside of this necroplasmic growth. Initially, Billy thought that he was very nearly killed by Spawn and didn't understand where he was until he realized that he was completely submerged inside of this liquid and was not breathing, and came to the conclusion that he had in fact died. As the sack thing falls to the ground, it bursts open, and Billy is now covered in slime, naked in the middle of this forest filled with growths that have other people inside of them. We see here he then quickly kills a lizard creature that is wandering through hell to wear its skin as clothing, because apparently he has a real problem with being naked. It's not something he's fond of. And then tries to decide what his next move is. However, he doesn't have very much time to be alone with his thoughts, as he is interrupted by this woman and a group of other people who are all in the same predicament as him. He doesn't really know any more than they do. They seem to be wandering through hell the same way that he is, trying to figure out what happened, what's going on. Most of them capable of remembering when they died, just as Billy does, but, they all died more so of natural causes instead of being murdered. One of the characters here we see is a little girl. She approaches Billy. They ask him his name. He tells them. They introduce themselves, and then they decide that they can't stay in what they're calling an orchard anymore and need to set out to see if they can find shelter or come to some sort of conclusion as to exactly where they are and what their next move should be. As they try to figure out where they are, they're interrupted by the little girl, who explains to them that there are 10 deadlands in hell, and they're like spheres that are inside of one another. And they're currently in the lowest sphere, which is where all souls that are condemned to hell first appear, and that there are 9 other levels that they can get to by accessing a tower. But that's where she's cut off and interrupted by a bright, shining light, which this woman believes to be a light from heaven of some sort of angelic being coming down to save her from the pits of hell. On the next page, we see an advertisement showing us that Neil Gaiman will write Spawn number 9. Well, that'll be fun to look at. Here on the next page, we see why the woman believed that she was being approached by an angel, as we see this large golden being with hair made out of fire and large bird-like wings. The being asks if there is anyone who sings a number of certain songs, to which the woman proclaims that she does all the time, and then begins to sing for the creature, who quickly snatches her up and flies away. However, the others notice that she is not flying using her wings. She is instead using a jetpack of sorts. The little girl then explains that this thing is a soul trapper, and that it is from the 6th sphere of hell, and that the soul trappers collect souls as trophies or fashion statements, as you will. She states that the previous year they were trapping acrobats. This year they're going after singers, which is why they snatched up the other woman. However, it's starting to get dark, so she stops talking and the rest of them set up camp for the evening. Unfortunately for Billy, his sleep is restless as he is continuously haunted by the dreams of his own death, constantly remembering Spawn and the pain and suffering that was inflicted upon him by Spawn, and he is basically just in constant terror whenever he goes to sleep. They awake the next morning and begin to head off once again, leaving their camp behind, when one of them is suddenly struck by a light from above and vaporized, essentially. We find out that this is a light from the 10th sphere of hell, which is from Prime Monad? I think that's how you say it, Prime Monad? I don't know. At any rate, the little girl explains that that's the highest sphere, and that Prime Monad uses the souls that he collects, or it collects, I should say, as circuitry for its macro computer, and that the man who just got vaporized was actually quite lucky. We see here Billy looking over what's left of a charred pile of corpse of that soul, and doesn't seem to really think that the girl's quite on point with him being lucky. As the group continues onward, one of the men claims that he sees Elvis. However, Billy realizes that this is not Elvis at all and tries to warn the man not to go any further, but the man does not heed the warning and is instead scooped up by a tentacle from what the little girl states is a Cthulhu Metabus from the 5th sphere, and that these creatures consume souls as a means of attaining a drug-like high. As they continue on, it begins to get dark. However, one of the people, this woman here, sees what she believes is a lucky crystal similar to what she owned in the world of the living. However, this again was another ruse by a creature of hell, as she is quickly eaten whole and is slowly being digested in this spider-like creature's thorax, which pretty horrible to see. Billy and the little girl start to move away to try and find safety somewhere else. The little girl explains to Billy that the creature is called a soul gourmet, and Billy seems to start being really weirded out by everything that's been going on and not really understanding what's happening. However, he is having everything explained to him by this little girl, and it's strange that she knows all this stuff. But the two of them decide to make camp for the evening as the lights have gone out. There's no sun in this place, which is one of the things Billy finds weird about it, is that there is a day and night cycle, but no sun to speak of. Once again, Billy's dreams are haunted by nightmares of Spawn and his final moments in the world of the living, and the excruciating pain and fear that he felt as Spawn slowly eviscerated him for the crimes of murdering so many children. 28 was the exact number. And he wakes from his dream startled and believes that the only way that he can alleviate this mental anguish that he's facing is to basically kill the little girl that he's with as a way of just resetting his anxiety and whatnot. So he slowly approaches her, grabs her around the neck. However, the little girl opens her eyes and states that she was wondering when he'd finally do this, as her head splits open to reveal a horrific demon inside of this little girl's skin. And here on the next page, we are introduced for the very first time to the Vindicator, who is one of the 5 Phlebaic brothers. The Phlebaic brothers, again, I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. It's Phlebiac, Phlebaic, I don't know. They are, I believe, somewhat high-ranking demons. The Violator is one of them, and there are 3 others. The Violator, of course, being the most prominently used of all of the 5 in the narrative. And this creature then explains to Billy that he's happy that Billy finally gave in to his instincts, because they were worried that he was going to wuss out, and they need him as a soldier in the Mabulge's army. And on the next page, we get a cool pull-out poster from Frank Miller, which looks like this. And as you can see, it's classic Frank Miller artwork. If you ever wondered what Spawn would have looked like had he made an appearance in Sin City, he would have looked like this, I'm pretty sure. We then see that on the next issue, the pull-out poster will be done by none other than Jim Lee. That's going to look awesome. And that Dave Sim will be writing Spawn number 10 with a poster insert from Rob Liefeld. Not sure if that's going to be quite as awesome as Jim Lee. Here on the next page, we see that Billy takes off running, terrified of the demon that's just appeared before him, and then he sees the tower that the demon in little girl form spoke of earlier that connects all the different spheres of hell, and believes that he can ascend the tower and escape the demon. However, this is not the case. As we can see, Billy quickly grows tired as he starts to climb the insanely tall tower, as we see how deeply it goes. And the demon himself catches up rather quickly and snatches Billy right up under his arm. We see here then that the Vindicator has got Billy under his arm and starts to ascend the staircase, going past all the different levels of hell. The second sphere, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh along the way, explaining all the different things that goes on in each one of those spheres, stating that he's lucky that he's going to the 8th sphere because that's the best of the bunch. Also explaining that he actually has no idea what goes on the 7th sphere, as the door to that sphere is sealed, and that no one actually knows what happens on the 7th sphere. And then they make it to the 8th sphere, where the Vindicator tells him that it's, the tops, that this is the best sphere to be on, and that this is where Billy belongs, due to being so talented as a callous killer. We see here on the next page that Billy is jumping around because the fire on the floor is burning his feet. However, the Vindicator then explains to him that this is a temporary problem, as he whistles for quote-unquote Billy's new slave clothes, and suddenly a costume just like that of Spawn's appears up from the floor to bond with Billy Kincaid. Interestingly enough, I'd completely forgotten that the Spawn symbiote costume does have an actual name designation. It's the K3 Mirlu, I believe is how you say it. And I find it kind of interesting that, like, these, supernatural hell symbiotes have actual designation codes, as if it were, some sort of military rifle or something like that. Billy, of course, totally freaks out as he's now confronted with the same image of the creature that ended his own life. He tries to run away, but the Vindicator tells him that it's useless, that he should just give in, as this is exactly where he belongs, and that this suit is very much going to be a part of him for a very long time, as we see Billy lying on the ground screaming as the symbiote catches up to him. We see here that the symbiote wastes no time in completely engulfing Billy's body, and on the bottom here, he is fully clothed in his new Spawn garb, as the Vindicator explains to him that this is really a good thing, how quickly it bonded to him and how well he's done, and that these costumes are all the rage here in hell. And he then sends Billy through a large bit of gates as Billy starts to complain that what's happened isn't fair, that the afterlife is full of alien monsters that are processing human as cattle, and that nobody here cares about good or evil. And the Vindicator just laughs it off, stating that, good and evil have no role in hell, and that this is exactly where Billy is supposed to be. This is what he's earned. As we see Billy starting to tear up, realizing that the life he led has brought him to this place of eternal damnation and punishment, and that he is now nothing more than just a slave in an army that he didn't want to be part of, in a place that he never wanted to be. On the final page of the story, we see here the Mabulja sitting upon his throne in a large room surrounded by hell spawns all over the place, as Billy looks up in shock at what he's seeing, not really being able to process what is happening to him, and still just completely overwhelmed by having been brought to this place and forced into this situation. On the next page, we see here that Frank Miller will be writing Spawn number 11, with a poster insert by Jeff Darrow. On the next page, we once again get image info. That's just a rundown of upcoming comics and things to be looking for on the comic book store shelves. We then get into the spawning ground, and interestingly enough, I've noticed going back and rereading these that Todd is actually really good about posting letters that are critical of him, not just ones that are constantly praising him. Most notably, people seemed to really have a lot of issues with the amount of violence that was in the Spawn comics, which is kind of funny to look at now, because in the world of, 30 years later at this point, there are comics that are out there far more violent than Spawn ever was. If you've ever picked up an issue of Crost's level of violence is 10 times that of what you see in Spawn. I mean, it is absolute gore fest in issues of Crossed. So it is kind of very indicative of the time that this book originally came out, that people were really shocked about the level of gore that existed within the pages of Spawn. As we turn the page, we once again see the rest of the Spawning Ground letter section and an advertisement for the Comic Book Greats video series. I've said this in another episode, but you can find most of these on YouTube and watch them. I highly recommend it. They're really cool interviews with Stan Lee, just interviewing a lot of the creators from the early days of Image, guys who were really prominent in Marvel, and just picking their brains about their thought process and the way that they do layouts and the way that they like to draw stuff. It's a really cool series, and I highly recommend you watch it. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement for Entertainment This Month, which was a mail-away service that you could get comic books from. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Image This, which I do not have an issue of this. I'd really like to get my hands on one and kind of see what this was all about. There's a lot of people who worked on it that I really appreciate, in terms of writers and artists. So I think this would be a really cool read. I'm going to have to really keep an eye out for this at maybe a convention, or if I'm in a comic book store that I've never been to, and maybe I'll be able to get one of these and do a video on it in the future. And that was Spawn number 8. Like I said, super iconic cover, pretty memorable issue in terms of its significance in really establishing more of the lore of Spawn and giving you more of a basis of what Todd McFarlane's version of hell is, and the way that will eventually play into the story down the line, and introducing the new character, the Vindicator, indicating that there's 5 Violator-esque demon creatures that exist who are all brothers, and kind of showing that the way that salvation works in the Spawn universe isn't quite the same as what it's portrayed as in biblical principle. Really just going in and, showing that Todd's kind of creating his own narrative and universe in terms of biblical theory, or at least his perception thereof. But these are just my thoughts. You may have different ones. I enjoyed this book. You may not, but that's okay either way. Thanks for stopping by. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great day.